Hi friends, Krista here. Thanks for stopping by Books and Jams, and I'm so excited to finally be coming at you with all of my favorite reads from 2020. I thought that, like last year, I would just share all of my 5-star reads and then go into my top 10. Oh, it was so hard. I don't know if it's the Enneagram 9 in me where I just want all the books to be winners. I read 193 books in 2020 and 38 of them were 5-star reads. I'm not going to go through every single 5-star read because some of them were library books and I don't own them. So I'm just going to do the ones that I own because it makes it easier. And we're just going to jump right in. So I'm going to first share 5-star reads that are not among my favorites, even though this was really hard. And if you asked me 2 weeks from now to pick the 10 favorites, there might be a little bit of wiggle room in the actual top 10 favorites. But before we get into those, here are the rest of my 5-star reads this year. Sacred Rhythms by Ruth Haley Barton. This is a Christian nonfiction. So good. Another nonfiction, The Landscapes of Anne of Green Gables by Catherine Reed. This just was stunning. A lot of biographical information about Ella Montgomery's life. The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. It was a reread for me. Absolutely love. The Kite Runner was also a reread by Khaled Hosseini. Bawled my eyes out. This was a contender for the top 10, but it just makes me feel sad when I think of it. And that's not how I want to feel when I think of a book. Same with Still Alice by Lisa Genova. Oh, cried so hard. I love how she makes you get into the head of some of her characters. So transporting. Jojo Moyes' The Giver of Stars. Such a good read. Packhorse Librarians in the Kentucky Mountains. The Lavender Garden by Lucinda Riley, a World War II historical fiction. So good. The Peach Keeper by Sarah Addison Allen. Just my type of magical realism. Recursion by Blake Crouch. Sci-fi at its best. Or the kind of sci-fi that I love. Blake Crouch does it. I love his books. This next little stack is all middle grade that I gave 5 stars to this year. Song for a Whale by Lynn Kelly, about a deaf girl who connects with a whale who can't communicate with his pod. Such a cool story. Emily of New Moon, the first in the Emily trilogy by Ella Montgomery. The Wednesday Wars by Gary D. Schmidt, deals with Vietnam War and kids in school and their reactions to all of it. So good. Another set during that time is Until Tomorrow, Mr. Marsworth by Sheila O'Connor. Such a fantastic read. Epistolary novel, which I love. Where the Mountain Meets the Moon by Grace Lin. A lot of Chinese folklore in here. Such a good middle grade book. And Hollowpox by Jessica Townsend. The Hunt for Morgan Crow. This is the third in the Nevermore trilogy. Not trilogy. Series. So good. Okay. I wanted to go through those quickly because now, oh man, now is the time. Now we're going to dive into my top 10. And for the number 10 spot and the number 9 spot, I actually am cheating a little bit. But it's my channel. I can do what I want to. In the number 10 spot, I have 2 different middle grade series, the Penderwicks and the Vanderbeekers. I love this series. I don't own them all, but I gave books 2, 3, and 4 this year, all 5 stars. Such a good story about sisters and family. Oh, it's lovely. And this one is another book about families, which is why I'm kind of lumping them together. You guys have heard me talk about these series so much on my channel. I feel like the Vanderbeekers books keep getting better and better, but these are such a great combination of humor and heart and just family dynamics. Love. The last one had me bawling. Ugh. Number 9, I'm also kind of cheating because it's an author that I really just fell in love with this year, and I read 2 of her books, and that's Susan Meissner. I read The Last Year of the War and As Bright as Heaven. As Bright as Heaven deals with the Spanish flu in 1918, and if we follow a family who travels to Philadelphia and gets right in the mix of it, and there's a little bit of a mystery, there's family dynamics. It's told in 3 different perspectives, and Susan Meissner does such a great job of giving each of those perspectives their own voice. Like you knew who it was about, even if you didn't see the name at the beginning of that chapter, because she just wrote them with their own strong sense of character. I love it. so much. And also I loved The Last Year of the War, which is where we follow two young women who meet at a internment camp in the United States, in Texas. One of them is a Japanese girl and the other is of German descent. So both of them connect for this short time while they're at this internment camp. We really follow Elise, who's of German descent, and her family. Both of these girls end up getting sent back to Germany and Japan. And we follow mostly Elise's story and what that's like at the end of the war to be sent back to Germany when you've lived your whole life in America. Oh, it was so moving, so touching. I just love her writing so much. So she had to be on my top 10 this year. I have a middle grade for number 8, and that is A Kind of Paradise by Amy Rebecca Tan. This is a book for book lovers. I just loved this so much. In this one, we follow Jamie, who's in middle school and makes a stupid mistake because of a crush that she has and ends up having to serve community service hours at her public library. And so it all takes place at this library. We meet the staff at the library, the patrons of the library, and Jamie just discovers and realizes what an important part of the community a library is. It is truly a kind of paradise, the library, that not all of us are able to appreciate right now, which makes me so sad. But yeah, this book was just lovely and uplifting, filled with heart. I absolutely loved it. Number 7 is a nonfiction, the first of 2 nonfiction that will be on this list. And I just read it in November, and that's Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. This book, I think this book is so important for everybody to read. I feel like it's super accessible for those who don't read a lot of nonfiction. It just talks about aging and the questions that we need to ask and what is important at the end of life. Is it just strictly health? Is it about purpose? It's so important for everybody to read. We all are going to age, first of all. Second of all, we all have loved ones who are nearing that stage of life where you need to start thinking about independent living or nursing home care or at-home care. Just so many different types of care that are available now. And it kind of talks about the history of some of those things. So many little anecdotes within here. And ultimately, it's Atul Gawande walking through this process with his own father. It's moving. It made me miss my grandmother so much. It's such an important read, and it had to be on my list this year. Number 6 is another author that was new to me this year, and I read 2 books by her, but this one was easily my favorite of the 2, and that is The Dream Daughter by Diane Chamberlain. This was such a emotional and quick read. I just could not put this book down. We follow Carly, who lives in the 1970s, and she's pregnant or has a young child or young baby who has some kind of medical situation that in the 70s, there's not really much cure or hope for this situation. Turns out her brother-in-law is from the future. He has time traveled back to the 70s, and he tells her about it and tells her that in the future there is a better medical care and that her baby has a higher chance of living and not having any consequences from this situation, medical situation. And so she has to choose to believe him or not believe him and travels to the future, and it goes from there. And there are nail-biting parts. There are heartwarming parts. It's also ultimately about the love of a mother for her child and the sacrifices that a mother is willing to take care of their kid. Oh, so good. I can't wait to read more from Diane Chamberlain. All right, number 5. Number 5 was a surprise. This is the first of 2 surprises in my top 10. I read The Broken Girls by Simone St. James, and this is kind of a thriller with a paranormal twist. What? Who am I? But this was so fantastic. I did this as a buddy read, which also just helps enhance the love of a book when I'm able to talk about it with other people. But I was a little wary of Simone St. James because I'm not usually a paranormal reader and I don't read a ton of thrillers. I just think the way that she wrote this book was fan-freaking-tastic. So many layers, so many characters, so many interconnected things. I was hooked, and I loved as we peeled back layers and learned a little bit more and more. I had so many different suspicions of what was actually going on, and I was not right most of the time. But it was really fun to follow along with the journey that Simone St. James took me on with this book. And I, surprisingly, am eager to read more from her. Who would have thought? Number 4 is a very typical Krista read in that it's a World War II historical fiction, The Alice Network by Kate Quinn. She just goes there in this book. This is pretty brutal at times. We follow this group of characters, and actually the timeline jumps back between World War I and World War II, so we get a little bit of both. We mainly follow Charlie. She's on the hunt for her cousin who has gone missing right at the tail end of World War II. It's like 1947. So she is pregnant and single and about to get kicked out of her family, and she's like, I'm just going to go find my cousin. So she kind of runs away. She has one little clue that leads her to Eve Gardner, and Eve is a tough cookie. She doesn't joke around. She's hard to get to know. She has a like brick wall exterior, and throughout this book, we start to learn why she is that way. She turns out was a spy during World War I, and Charlie believes her cousin might have been connected with this spy network. So Eve and her assistant and Charlie kind of go on this adventure, almost tracing back through Eve's journey as a spy during World War I. And you learn about some of the horrible things that she had to experience as she was undercover in Germany during that time. And then also Charlie and her search for her cousin. It's just, I was in it. The ride was rough and it was a little brutal at times. And Kate Quinn is not afraid to take us to those deep, dark moments. And it was a little crazy at times, but I just absolutely loved it. So I put that at the number 4 spot this year. Another sort of historical fiction that was another surprise for me this year is A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. This is a book that I did not want to read. This was everywhere on BookTube for the last couple years. People read it and loved it, and they would describe it, and I'm like, I don't think that's a book that I really care about. That doesn't sound very interesting at all, because it's about this man who is sentenced to life house arrest at a hotel, and he has to spend the rest of his days at this hotel. And I'm like, boring. But, I was so wrong. I was so captivated by the character of Count Rostov, and that is something that really stands out to me in looking back on this book. Count Rostov, the main character, he is such a delight, such a gentleman. It's like perfect title, because he's such a gentleman, and the way that he cares for other people and treats other people in the midst of his own kind of rough circumstances was so uplifting. I really loved him. And we also, he makes this connection with this young girl who kind of becomes like an adopted daughter to him. And so we see that relationship grow over decades. He also has a friendship with a couple of the hotel staff that lasts over decades. It was just so lovely. And a highlight as well is that I read this because Katie from Life Between Words hosted a Zoom author event with Amor Towles, and I was fascinated by him and the way that he wrote this book and the structure of the book that I didn't pick up on everything as I was reading it. It just was so, I always love to get to hear from authors, and so that memory of being a part of that Zoom call, but also Count Rostov and this book itself, just had to put this on the list, and I just think of this with such fond memories that it's number 3 for me. Number 2 is a middle grade. Surprise, surprise. And I just read this really recently. And I think this is another like super important book. And this hit me very deeply. And it's Fighting Words by Kimberly Brubaker Bradley. You may know her from The War That Saved My Life and The War I Finally Won. Those are 2 books that I've loved in the past by her and that are very popular. And this is her newest that just came out this year. Guys, this book was so incredibly moving, and we follow 2 sisters who are escaping their home because their stepfather is sexually abusive to them. They run away and eventually end up at this foster home where we just have the most wonderful foster care mother who is not the sugary sweet foster mother or the like abusive foster mother. We kind of see those 2 extremes. She's just exactly what these 2 girls need. There are so many content warnings for this book: attempted suicide, foster care, and of course sexual abuse of minors. Like, it deals with some heavy, heavy topics. But throughout all of this, we also see the young girl, the main character, who is a strong, feisty girl with a mouth. There's no swearing in here, but you know what words are swearing because she changes the word. I forget the word that she actually changes the swear words into, but you know when she's swearing. So she's a little bit feisty, but I love that. She's a strong girl, and her and her sister, the way that they love each other, the memories that they have, the very few memories they have of their mother. I mean, this book had me gripped from the beginning. I was infuriated at some of the adults and the way that they handled situations, but there was also adults who handled things really well. I love that therapy was a big part of this, and the foster mom really pushed for the girls to both be in therapy. I love so much of how this book was handled, and I love the school situation where there's a whole bully and the girls learn to stand up to bullies at school. Like, it just deals with so much, and I feel like this is so important for young women to read, and young men even, to know how to be a good friend. Oh, there were such good friendships in here. To know that they are not alone, to just understand that this is something that kids deal with as well. I don't think I would hand this to an 11-year-old or a 12-year-old, but I might hand it to their mom and say, read this first, or their dad, read this first, and then read it with your kid, because it just deals with topics that I feel like need to be discussed with young people. Oh golly, this was a good one. And I don't think anybody is going to be surprised with my number one pick. I legit called this at the end of January in 2020, and I said, this is going to be my favorite book of the year, and that has not changed. I read some fantastic books throughout 2020, but throughout all of them, I'm like, yeah, but The Sun Does Shine is still my favorite. It's still my favorite. Oh my word. This is a nonfiction, and it's written by Anthony Ray Hinton with Laura Love Hardin. And Anthony Ray Hinton was wrongfully convicted of a crime. I mean, have you heard me talk about this book before? Sorry if you've heard me talk about it hundreds of times, but he was wrongfully convicted of murder that he did not commit. So much race issues came into play, so much just disgusting behavior by the justice system in Alabama. And he spent 30 years on death row. Innocent. 30 years as an innocent man on death row. But his character and his hope and his, just the way that his integrity, it just shines through in the midst of this. His faith, he does not gloss over the fact that he spent years being angry and bitter, as to be expected when you're wrongfully convicted. But he ends up befriending others that are on death row, the way that they kind of form their own little brotherhood. He has relationships with the guards. He is just this incredible man that people ended up looking up to, as they should, because he's incredible. And I'm sure he's not perfect. And I'm sure that there were really, really dark days. And he does talk about those as well. But I just found this book inspiring and challenging, infuriating, and hope-filled. I just love it so, so much. And if you read Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson is the lawyer who worked with Anthony Ray Hinton and eventually got him released and exonerated. So this book, if you haven't read it on my recommendation yet, I strongly recommend that you do. It's so good. All of these books that I mentioned today are just so good. It was a fantastic reading year in 2020. One blessing of being home so much in the last year is all the extra reading that we all got to do. And there were just some fabulous ones. And so thanks for watching. I would love to hear what your favorite of the year was. Have you read any of my favorites? Do you feel differently than me about any of them? Do you feel the same? Did you pick up any of them on my recommendation? I would love to hear that down in the comments below. I love chatting about books. I love you guys. I love that we are all here in this bookish community together, and I'm so hopeful that 2021 is going to bring some fantastic reads to all of us. I would love it if you'd give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that little bell so you know when I post new videos, and I will be talking to you very soon in another video. Bye.